different skeptics associations, Choice Magazine, the Australian Greens, all had input into there saying that basically there was no evidence base for natural medicine. And, when I talk about the Greens, this will no doubt shock some of your listeners who would imagine that a party which is devoted to a clean and pure environment would be actually very supportive of natural therapies. But maybe later on in this chat we'll talk about a little bit about politics and the Health Australia Party, which I co-founded back in 2015. And what we found was, in fact, that the Australian Greens under Dr. Di Natale, their leader, is very anti-natural medicine, and the stance that they took and the submission that they made to the Therapeutic Goods Administration hearing clearly supported the skeptics and the Friends of Science in Medicine against natural therapies. So what we've had is this circuit of events which have all been linked back to each other, because NHMRC referred to the UK Parliament, and FSM are referring to all the article in Chang and to the UK parliamentary report, and that NHMRC report has informed all these other activities. So I've got a little diagram that I use in presentations which shows the different links between all these groups, but it's a very determined international attempt to marginalise natural medicine.
Can you talk us through the FSM? I haven't heard of the FSM before. What does that stand for?
Friends of Science and Medicine.
Oh, right, yeah, sorry. That was the first time you referred to it.
Oh, sorry, I'm doing acronyms again, aren't I?
It's okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to keep up with you.
Okay. Anyone who's interested to see what the anti-natural medicine lobby looks like, unashamedly looks like, all you need to do is to Google Friends of Science in Medicine, go onto their website. They're totally unapologetic about their negative and very biased opinion of natural therapies. They quote, for example, when they refer to homeopathy, a British homeopathic professor who actually was claimed to have homeopathic qualifications, and in fact had to come out and admit that he never actually did a course. And so they're quoting people of dubious character, and they're very selective in their use of evidence. They totally ignore the wealth of evidence supporting the majority of those natural therapy modalities that I read out before that exist internationally.
Are you able to talk us through a little bit of this evidence that you're talking about that support these natural medicines?
Yeah. So when one looks at the World Health Organization, and by the way, they're very pro-pharmaceuticals, but they issued a report. I haven't got the exact name immediately in front of me, although I might be able to dig it up. They issued a report which basically said that parliaments around the world, governments around the world, should actually adopt natural therapies, traditional medicines in their health systems, in their national health systems. I'm just trying to see if I can find the exact quote here, because I know I had it just recently at hand. Anyway, look, I won't keep looking. Oh, here we go. It was the WHO Traditional Medicine Strategy 2014 to 2023. So that strategy document, for those who are interested, can be downloaded from the World Health Organization, and they basically recommended that governments include natural therapies in national health systems. And obviously the NHMRC reports, the Friends of Science and Medicine, all of these people are opposed to that view.
Yep.
But what it was based on was a collection of evidence from around the world. And the evidence isn't always these sterile, randomised controlled trials, which the pharmaceutical industry finds extremely useful because they sound as though they're very rigorous, they sound as though they're independent, but yet they can be quite easily and are very easily manipulated.
Yep.
So when one looks at the different modalities around the world, one has to go to different languages. The NHMRC report excluded anything that wasn't in English. But, for example, they said that Ayurvedic medicine didn't work. Well, obviously, the bulk of the literature about Ayurvedic medicine is in Hindi or one of the Indian languages. They also were negative about traditional Chinese medicine. Of course, traditional Chinese medicine, most of the evidence is in Chinese.
Yep.
In terms of homeopathy, a huge amount of evidence is in European languages because homeopathy was started in Germany over 200 years ago and flourishes and still does. In Germany, France, in some of the old Soviet Union countries, there are homeopaths in every country in Europe, and some have a higher standing than others. A significant percentage of French homeopaths French doctors have homeopathic training, and quite a percentage in England as well. So the evidence that was looked at in the NHMRC report saying that there was no evidence existing was very cherry-picked. Let me give you a little example. In the homeopathy report, if you look at the NHMRC website, you'll see they talk about looking at 1,800 articles. You know, they cherry-picked that number down to about 350, which they said satisfied certain requirements, and then they further cherry-picked that down to 5. Only 5 articles form the basis of their conclusion that there was no evidence of effectiveness for homeopathy. And in fact, the NHMRC appointed 3 peer reviewers. These were their own appointments. And they asked the Australian Cochrane collaboration also to look at their report. 2 of the peer reviewers and the Australian Cochrane collaboration all said that they should not come to the conclusion that they did. And yet they ignored those independent peer reviewers that basically were saying their methodology was flawed. They also appointed at the beginning a very highly respected researcher to collect and analyse the data. That researcher produced a report, and within 1 day of receiving the report, they sacked her. And they appointed a second researcher. And obviously the reason they sacked her was because her finding was positive for homeopathy.
Yep.
And then halfway through the second researcher's report, they changed the rules of the research procedures, and that's where they finally cherry-picked down to only 5 articles out of 1,800. So we're not talking about bona fide science here in terms of the negative campaign. In terms of the positive, there are thousands of articles in peer-reviewed journals around the world. They're not all peer-reviewed pharmaceutical journals, of course. So if you only look at peer-reviewed pharmaceutical journals, you say, well, there's hardly anything there. But if you look at peer-reviewed natural therapy journals, then there are thousands and thousands of research articles on all aspects of the different modalities in natural medicine showing evidence of effectiveness.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that, because I did look at the document from the government, the review on Australian government rebate on natural therapies for private health insurance. And just upon looking at it, I was thinking, why is there no evidence for all of these natural therapies? Like, to me, it just didn't really make sense. It's when I thought, oh, there's something, there must be something else going on. And that's when I sought out to speak to you about it. So it makes a lot more sense.
It would be like someone saying, we want to provide evidence that pharmaceutical medicines work, and they only looked in herbal medicine journals. It's stupid, isn't it, even to suggest that? But in simple terms, that's basically what the NHMRC did in terms of how wide they looked. when looking for evidence for these different modalities.
Yeah. And I guess just as a person who's living, under the government, they just assume that any science that the government uses for their policies will be objective and, real science and wouldn't be biased at all.
Yep. And look, this is the real problem, because most reasonable people would think that. And this is why there are 2 petitions now circulating. Mine is just about closed. There's another one. My one was naturalmedicinepetition.com. But the one that's still going and is getting closer and closer to 100,000 signatures online, mine was a paper-based one, is yourhealthyourchoice.com.au. So I'd urge any of you, the people listening, if you haven't already signed that, please do it. Because what that is asking for, it's a petition to the Senate, asking the Senate to establish a Senate committee into the integrity of the NHMRC reporting process. And all we're asking for is that the Senate have a look and see for themselves how dishonest this whole process was. As I said, if it was done by other than the most senior government institution in this area, people would immediately have thrown their arms up and said, well, this is scientific fraud. But, of course, it's very, very difficult to establish that because politicians rely on these people for their guidance. But there is also an ombudsman's complaint being considered at the moment against the NHMRC for the way they went about the administration and the procedures that they used. And I don't know how long before that ombudsman's report will be finished, but the 2 petitions and the ombudsman report hopefully will bring to light what actually happened, and people will be shocked. And, to be honest with you, when one looks at the mainstream media in Australia, it is very, very biased in favour of pharmaceutical medicine, and that's understandable because Big Pharma gives them hundreds of millions of dollars a year in advertising revenue. But I think if the truth comes out, even they will have to report it. And if people and if politicians get to know the truth, then hopefully the consequences that have arisen from these reports by the NHMRC will be able to be undone. And the real veracity of pharmaceutical medicine, the science behind it in Australia, will be put on show.
For people listening, if you're interested in signing this petition, I will put this website onto the description of this podcast. So if you didn't catch that, it'll be there.
Thank you for that.
That's okay.
Sorry, you go ahead.
I was just interested in what you were saying about, I guess, the pharmaceutical industry and how that's so influential in our culture, in our society, and how there's lots of money and things behind the scenes that normal people aren't really aware of that are motivating factors in that. Are you able to talk a little bit more about that?
Love to.
Yep.
So basically the situation has been well and truly documented. So to some people listening, they might think, oh, here we go, another conspiracy theory. I personally really dislike conspiracy theories. And one reason I dislike them is because they're unnecessary. There is so much information and data out there already. We don't need to rely on conspiracy theories. I direct people probably to one of the best actual examinations of the pharmaceutical industry internationally was done in Harvard University within their law school there, and I think it was the Edwin J. Safra, Saffra, ethics lab within the Harvard University Law School. And look, Harvard University Law School is regarded as being one of the premier law schools in the whole world. So, these are serious people. And what they did, a group of them in this ethics lab, undertook an examination of all aspects